One of the things that I've heard you say that is very compelling and very true is the pressure that this exerts on society. And we're getting more polarized and the wealth inequality is growing and it's coming out in different ways, right? And we're blaming red or blue or this or that. But at the end of the day, it seems like if you connect the dots, it's our monetary system's broken and it allows people to privatize their gains, socialize their losses. And the average person who doesn't hold assets, their life is getting more and more difficult. So I just want to ask you, I mean, there are folks out there predicting a really big crash, right? And it's like that broken clock that's right twice a day. And others say, well, there's no way that the Fed would allow a big crash. So maybe there's a drawdown 20%, but then they would just inject liquidity and prevent it from falling further. So where do you stand on that? Because from everything that you're saying, we are too leveraged. There's too much debt. There's too much excess in the system that has to wash out at some point. And we have had the busts. So what do you see happening over the next year or couple of years?
Well, first, to your earlier point there, in terms of wealth inequality, it's been a concern of mine for quite some time. To generally, obviously, we've seen political fragmentation across global Western societies, if you will. I think in the U.S. is probably a lot more extreme than in Europe at this point. And I hate to see it. I think just generically people want to blame social media and the influences of disinformation and this, that, the other. I think that's all part of it. But what is completely left off the public debate and consciousness is the reality of what has happened over the last 20 years. The boom and bust cycles we've had, and no one can prevent a bust, and things happen. This is part of the normal business cycle. But and I'll give them the credit. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say they did it all with the best of intentions, and that is to intervene. During the global financial crisis, they had to intervene because we were literally hours from the entire global banking system to blow up. No one wants a depression. I don't want a depression, right? So they had to intervene, and they did their best. So fair enough. But if you now posted that clip as well, Ben Bernanke, he was in front of Congress. He was specifically asked, what is your intention with the balance sheet, and you want to get back out? And yes, he said, yeah, we'll reduce the balance sheet and we'll go back to where it was just before the global financial crisis. False, because right after that, the trap happened. That was the first test, and that was they ended QE1, and guess what? Stocks just dropped 22%.
Yeah.
And what did Bernanke do? He hinted at QE2, and that was it. That was the end of that. We just rallied right back up. And then they realized, and this was the other thing Bernanke said back then, and I think this is really important to understand. He said in one of the Fed minutes that rising markets will help grow confidence with consumers, who will then spend more in the economy. And all of a sudden, the link was established, meaning rising asset prices will improve the economy. What he failed to acknowledge to himself, I suppose, is the fact that asset prices are owned by the minority.
Yes.
We're now at the point where 89% of stocks are owned by the top 10%. And of course, if you filter down that further, you realize that it is literally top 10%, top 1% and top 0.1% that garner all the benefits.
Yep.
And so what happens is when you go from crisis to crisis and you always bail out the stock market, you in essence further divide, because for someone that gets caught up in a housing crisis and loses their house, the damage is lasting for years, right? If they file bankruptcy or whatever else is happening on top of losing their jobs. If my stocks go down and I'm a billionaire, it sucks for a few weeks, right? But then they come back up and I'm okay. And they go higher each time around. So the wealth inequality is building, but the wealth inequality is just a phrase, right? There's specific consequences to that, because the wealthier get wealthier, where they're going to put their money. Oh, okay, I can buy more stocks, or I can buy more real estate. I'm going to buy this house. I'm going to buy that house, and I can rent it out to people, right? And all of a sudden, you get kind of a price lever in in items that cost the regular folks a lot of money.
Yep.
So there's more pressure built on them to keep up with housing prices, right? And they have to lever themselves more into debt as well. So it's a broad cancer that starts building. Okay. And I think what's been happening in the last 20 years is that people feeling ever more left behind.
Yes.
And that breeds resentment. That the resentment may not have, a specific, awareness of what's going on, but it's there. And then so when you have tools like social media coming in, and you have the right voices in the sense that they know how to tap into that anger and resentment, all of a sudden you get polarity. And the polarity itself becomes an obstacle for society to actually solve problems, because there are real problems and they're complex. But if all of a sudden the political structure is incapable of agreeing where the sun rises in the morning, you cannot tackle problems if you can't agree on what the problem actually is, never mind coming to a solution for it. So I think democracy in the Western world, and in America in particular, and this is the scary part, is because of all this resentment that's built, the wealth inequality, the left behind feeling, leaves America ultimately vulnerable. Because if the solution, because for the lack of political forces to actually come to common sense solution, if the alternative is to just ask for central banks to mask over the problems with easy money, you keep propagating the problem.
Yeah.
You keep making it worse each time around. And so you get to a cycle where there's no solution. And then ultimately central banks can't do it anymore, because all of a sudden their efficacy is completely reduced, because each time there's ever more debt, for example, and each time they can raise rates less and less, and they're forced to cut them again at a lower and lower level, then all of a sudden maybe that bailout mechanism that we now believe works every single time, maybe we get to the point where it doesn't work every time. And then everyone that wanted to avoid pain over the last 20 years, then we're going to make it much, much worse, right? What if they can't stop it? That's the worry.
Yeah, I mean, everything you say is just so poignant. And this is actually one of the reasons why I ended up changing my career from journalism and wanting to educate people on Bitcoin, because ultimately you're not just educating them on Bitcoin, you're educating them on the problem that it's trying to fix. Because I think what's sad is so many people don't understand how this system works, and why having, a healthy stock market doesn't necessarily benefit the person at home watching TV and watching the ticker. And I always found it so odd that our country judges the health of the economy by how much people are spending or going into debt, as opposed to how much they're saving. That was always really backwards. And my parents, who are immigrants, they're like, this isn't a healthy economy. This doesn't mean that we're doing well as a country. We're basically exporting everywhere. We no longer make anything. We're exporting basically nothing but debt. And I just think things are so backwards now, and people are they're trying to find someone to blame. Like you mentioned, there's this feeling of angst and resentment. And I reported on it every single day as a journalist. I would interview people about poverty, homelessness, public corruption. And always it was this feeling of, yeah, I'm left behind. The system isn't fair, but yet we try to fix it with things that make it even more unfair, that allow for rent seeking, that allow for this crony sense of capitalism. And now we've gone so far that you can't pop the bubble. That would be devastating. So I mean, what do you see playing out? Do you think we'll ultimately have this devastating deflationary bust, or do you think they're going to keep printing, which is going to lead to more inflation and people will opt out with things like Bitcoin? What do you see happening?
Well, on that, I think the honest answer is, and this is probably the most frightening answer, is that nobody knows. Not the central bankers, not the politicians, not the corporations either. I think we're really in a very unique pickle here. Look, I love America, but I'm also very sad in terms of how structurally it is deficient. They keep talking about infrastructure, but I think the human infrastructure is very sad. I mean, such a rich country, so much wealth in it, and yet so much poverty and so much, just destitute out there, and it's sad. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I think, like right now, you asked me about the next year or two. What they're trying, in my mind, what they're trying to do is, obviously they realized inflation got a lot hotter than they expected, right? They don't want to raise rates a lot because they can't. And I'll tell you why they can't. In 2018, the stock market, besides the Fed tightening, something really important happened. The 10-year hit 3.2%, a 30-year downward trend line from the 80s. Every time it hits that trend line, it's lights out. It was lights out in 2007, but it was much higher up, right? But it was 3.2%, hit that trend line, and then markets dropped 20% immediately into Q4, right? Mm-hmm. And the realization was, to me anyway, was the reason it stopped is because we had this incredible debt construct built that, the global financial crisis took a lot of money, right? It was deficits. We had $1 trillion deficits. And then we got to a point where, all this debt is financed with cheap money. Yeah, you can have the greatest party ever if you have just free money for everybody. Go back to the college days. Hey, free beer, free this, free that, we can have a great time. But when rates rise again, the cost of carrying that debt rises tremendously with it. So the system is so bloated and indebted that cannot, if we went back to 2007 rates to tomorrow, and 2007 rates were historically not high at all, 5%. If you went back to that tomorrow, the entire global financial system would immediately collapse. Game over, done.
All the credit would unwind, yeah.
It was just complete disaster, okay? So when the 10-year got to 3.2%, that was too much. And guess what we've done since 2008? We just added $8 trillion in debt. $8 trillion on top of that. So the notion, and by the way, I'm tracking a technical pattern on the 10-year. I've been tracking it since last year with this potential inverse. Beginning of the year, I just put that out again on January 4th. I think is maybe the most important chart because that technical pattern points to 3.2%. But knowing that we added $8 trillion in debt since 2018, I guarantee you that system that couldn't handle 3.2% with $8 trillion less debt can handle it this time. So there is going to be a point before where basically the Fed will have to step in again.
Yeah.
No matter what they say, okay? Because whatever they say, it never comes true anyway.
I know.
Flip-flop, okay?
It goes from the Greenspan put to the Bernanke put to the Yellen put to the Powell put. To
yeah, and the reason is math, okay? Yeah. And so if they get to the point where yields again rise to a level, and I don't know what that level will be. Right now we hit 1.9 on the 10-year today. I can imagine something in the 2 to 3, 2.5, 2.6. Yeah. If we get there, the market will let us know what that level is, and we'll start unraveling again. And then the Fed has absolutely no choice but to pivot again. It is the trap we're in, unfortunately. And that's the sad part is we're all subject to this song and dance about, they are the, I don't know, what do you call them? The arbiters or the committee that presides over everything, and they have the inside knowledge. They don't have any inside knowledge. Yeah. They're complete. Last year is a classic example. They kept talking about transitory. They're not going to raise rates until 23 or 24. Well, guess what? Now they have to do it now. So were they right? No. Did they have any special insights? No. But the market keeps giving them the credibility as if they have specific insights. In 2018, they were talking about raising rates. In 2019, well, they cut them 3 times. There's no predictability. There's no reliance on anything. Yeah, you got to change your minds when the data changes. But, like for this year, people like myself were screaming all summer long last year, what are you doing? Stop printing.